Kelly Ann Bates was subject to one of the worst and unimaginable deaths that you have probably ever heard about. This was done at the hands of a sadistic psychopath. This is Kelly's story. Hey guys, welcome back to the Raven's Room. So before we do this case, I just need to put it out there, disclaimer, whatever you want to call it, that this is particularly horrific. It's really bad. The details are I don't even know how to describe them. It's incomprehensible how much suffering this child went through before she died. So yeah, if you're going to watch this video, just be prepared that this will most likely haunt you for a few days after, and you probably will think about what happened to her. And it's not pleasant. When I read about this case and researched it, it stayed with me and still has. It's just so bad. It's just so bad. So yeah, just be prepared. And if you're not prepared, then please don't watch it. Kelly Ann Bates was born on the 18th of May 1978. She was actually born early by 2 weeks and 6 days. So even as a baby, she was full of energy and she wanted to make her mark on the world. She was born to two loving and doting parents, Tommy and Margaret Bates. Mum was incredibly proud of her and her two siblings, which were two boys, two brothers, Andrew and Paul. The family lived in a house in Hattersley in Manchester, England. Mum would go on to say that having her children made her feel like she had finally done something right in the world. Mum would also describe Kelly as being a really easy baby as babies go. So she would sleep a lot and tend not to be that fussy. This would carry on into childhood and early teenagehood. Throughout the years, it became obvious that Kelly was going to be a little bit of a tomboy. She was really into sports, she was very headstrong, and she had dreams to become a teacher. Mum and Dad had always wanted all of their children to be really confident and with high self-esteem. They wanted them to be able to make decisions and be autonomous and independent. Mum would say that as a child, she felt that she had little self-esteem and confidence, so she really wanted to instill this in her children. This is probably part of the reason why Kelly grew up to be quite mature for her age. So people would often remark on this, that she seemed a lot older than what she was. For example, she joined a women's hockey team and she actually played as the goalie. So she was a teenager, like 13, 14, and she was playing with a team of women. But she loved it. She got on with all the women got on with her. So yeah, she seemed to definitely be ahead of her years in terms of her maturity. Because of this maturity, lots of families in the area trusted Kelly to babysit. So she lived on a housing estate, so a lot of families there would need babysitters from time to time, and they'd often call Kelly. And a lot of these people would be friends of Kelly's parents. So one evening she was asked to babysit, and she did. The babysitting went well, the parents of the child came home, but they also came home with somebody else. They brought home another man. This man was called James Patterson Smith, and at the time he would have been 45 years old. Kelly at this time was 14 years old, so there was a 32-year age gap in between these two. So James initially seemed quite charming. He seemed like a nice guy. He actually offered to walk Kelly home because he wanted to make sure that she was safe. So Kelly, being 14, probably thought, oh, what a nice guy, like it's really nice of him to offer. And she said yes. Why wouldn't she say yes? Because this seemed like quite a nice thing to do. This was a man making sure that a child got home safe. However, on the way home, James, it seemed, had some ulterior motives. So he began to charm Kelly, to flatter her, to give her lots of compliments, probably telling her that she seemed a lot more mature for her age, telling her that she was beautiful, asking her to meet him again. Now, you have to remember that Kelly was only 14 at this point, and she had no prior relationships with boys, so she wouldn't have known what was normal, what wasn't normal. The fact that he was older, I'm sure, played on her mind, but she probably didn't think too much of it because of the sheer level of flattery and love bombing that would have been happening. And remember, a child's brain at 14 is still well in development. So she's not able to risk assess that situation and see it for what it was and how fucking creepy this guy was, let's be real. So Kelly, bless her, this probably made her feel really special, and she said yes to meeting him again. But it's also clear that on this walk, James would have told Kelly not to tell her parents about this. Because you see, Kelly and her parents were actually quite close. They were a tight-knit family. And she never mentioned anything about James and how old he was. But she did go home and she mentioned someone called Dave Smith. She started to mention Dave Smith a lot more often in the weeks and months that followed. So she would tell her mum, oh, Dave walked me home today, Dave got me this, Dave got me that. Everything was all about Dave, but of course mum and dad had never seen Dave, so they presumed that Dave was also another, 14, 15-year-old, and they presumed he was probably a classmate from school, especially because Kelly said Dave had been walking her home a lot. As Kelly and her parents were quite close, there was no reason for her parents to not believe this. There was no reason for her parents to think anything untoward was happening. They trusted Kelly's judgment and had no reason to doubt her. After all, she was very mature for her age. And they worked hard on instilling confidence and independence. Eventually, Kelly would go on to say that Dave Smith was now her boyfriend. And remember, Dave Smith is actually James Patterson Smith, that 45-year-old man. So her parents have no idea this is happening. Kelly is continuing to get manipulated and coerced into thinking that this is a normal relationship. But surely it's only going to be a matter of time before her parents find out, right? But actually, James and Kelly continue to date in secret for nearly 2 years until her parents finally meet him. Now, within this time, before they met him, Kelly had often started to disappear from the house at night, so she might be gone missing for 1 or 2 nights at a time. And her parents had no idea what was going on, where she was. So James, a 48-year-old man, would ring the house phone and pretend to be a 14, 15-year-old teenage boy. I don't know how he managed to do that, because there is obviously a very big difference in, a man's voice and a teenage boy's voice. I'm not sure how that went down, but either way, her parents, it didn't arouse enough suspicion for them to think something else was going on. So he would ring on the nights that Kelly would be missing, and the parents would have also informed the police on these nights that she went missing to try to find her, but no one could ever find her. And then they'd get calls from Dave wondering where Kelly was and if she was safe. So it seemed to the parents that this Dave, this 14-year-old kid, really a 45-year-old man, was concerned about Kelly. He cared about her. He wanted to know where she was and if she was safe. But little did the parents know that Kelly was actually staying at his house. So he was calling them in order to manipulate them, to kind of convince them into liking him and thinking that he had her best interests at heart. And he would have also done this knowing eventually her parents are going to have to meet him, and he's going to be considerably older than what they think he is. So it's almost like he's trying to butter them up from afar before the actual meeting happens. So on the day that Kelly was going to bring back Dave to meet her parents, it had been a year and 7 months at this time. So they were going out secretly for a year and 7 months. And remember, by secret, I mean her parents had never met Dave, because there was no Dave. It was James, this 45-year-old man. Well, probably, 46 now at the time that they were going to meet. So Kelly had been keeping this secret for quite a while. And that's quite a big deal for people who are quite close in terms of a family unit. So you can already tell at this stage in the relationship, there was already a wedge forming between Kelly and her parents. She was keeping secrets for them, and she was being manipulated by James, or fake Dave, to keep these secrets, because he obviously knew if they found out who he was, what age he was, they would have completely flipped out. So the reason why they waited a year and 7 months before introducing fake Dave to Kelly's parents was because then that meant Kelly was 16. And in UK law, once a child turns 16, the police can't really intervene anymore. They're considered an adult in terms of the decisions they make for romantic relationships and sexual relationships. And there is no doubt that it was James or fake Dave who knew about this, and that's why he didn't want to meet the parents before she turned 16. So even that in itself is quite well, apart from being absolutely disgusting, but it's quite calculated, and it goes to show that he can play a long game to wait for what he wants. So the day of the meeting comes, and Kelly and fake Dave get back to the parents' house before the parents get there. So Tommy and Margaret haven't came yet. And fake Dave and Kelly are in the house. She's showing him around. She's probably showing him her child's bedroom. Just so gross. Showing like a nearly 50-year-old man. Anyway, so he's there, and then the parents come in. So they come in through the front door, and Margaret says she remembers coming into the hallway and seeing fake Dave come down the stairs, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. So she had an actual physical reaction of seeing this man. It's also interesting to note that there is a study, I think it's by Malloy and Malloy, I can't remember the year, but it states that certain people have an actual dermatological reaction to seeing psychopaths, or certain people with personality disorders, that they feel it in their skin, like their hairs rise up. They feel like a sensation on their skin, which is interesting. I thought of that when I heard like Margaret's description. Maybe it was that. She also went on to state that she had a sudden urge to go to the kitchen, pick up a bread knife and stab him in the back. And this is a woman who isn't violent. So even for her, it kind of shocked her that she had this strange urge. When he came down the stairs, he actually said to the parents, "Nice to finally meet you." And all Mum could think of was how much she wanted to get rid of him and get him out of her house. So initially Mum and Dad are like, what the hell? This guy is clearly a man. He's not a 14-year-old child. What is this? And, you know, they said to him, oh my God, like what age are you? How old are you? And interestingly, he says, I'm 32. Now, he ain't passing for 32. Come on, look at the guy. But I wonder if he said 32 because there's actually a 32-year age gap in between them. Maybe that's a coincidence, but that is kind of weird. Either way, they bought this and they thought, okay, he's 32. They weren't happy about it at all. But at the same time, she was 16. There's technically not much they can actually do. Like they were kind of helpless. Like by the law in the UK, there's nothing they can do to stop her. She can go out with this guy. As gross and disgusting as it is, there's literally nothing they can do. And that is exactly what fake Dave knew. So fake Dave comes across as really charming to the parents and tries to put their mind at ease, saying how much he loves Kelly and blah 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 blah. And the parents, you know, again, they don't really buy into this. They're not happy with it, but they think that if they say to Kelly, like, you can't be with him, what are you doing, that she's just gonna say, oh, whatever, I'm gonna be with him anyways. And, you know, they fear that she would move out or she'd be pushed closer to him. So they didn't want to do that. So they did make it clear to Kelly, though, that they were unhappy. And, you know, Mum would say things like, oh, Kelly, like, what are you doing with him? Like, he can do so much better, you know, kind of in a jovial but serious way. Like, come on, like, what is this? But Kelly's response would always just be like, I like him, he's nice. Dad also questioned her about the age gap difference, and as much as he was unhappy about it, I think he probably tried to make himself feel better about it by saying, you know, she hangs around with a lot of older people, like the hockey and hanging out with fully grown women. Maybe it's an extension of that she just prefers the company of older people. I think that's probably how he tried to rationalize it in his mind, because again, she's 16, there's actually nothing they can do, even if they wanted to. So Mum was kind of at her wit's end, and the only thing she could do was ask around about fake Dave. So, you know, she went around the community and she was asking people, have you heard of Dave Smith? He's 32. Nobody heard of him, obviously, because he's fake Dave. So she thought that was kind of strange, but of course she didn't know his name was fake, so what is she to do? She just thinks, okay, he seems like a quiet guy. So Kelly and fake Dave continued to date, and it's unclear from the information that I've read as to how they actually found out that he was a lot older than what he was. I'm not sure if it was that they were forthcoming with the information or if someone in the community told them. But either way, they found out. And of course, immediately they went and they said it to fake Dave and to Kelly. And it was also at this time that they found out his name wasn't really Dave. He wasn't fake Dave. He was actually James. So now they know, oh my God, his name is James. He lied about his name and he's actually 47 years old. So James's excuse or rationale that he gave to them was, oh, I thought that if you knew about the age that you wouldn't have been happy about our relationship and that they wouldn't want him with their daughter. And of course, he was right. And it's also really gross to note that he was actually a year older than Kelly's dad. Ugh. So now the parents knew the truth. His name was James, and at the time he would have been about 46 or 47. But they didn't know about his past, and it's not clear whether Kelly knew either. I somehow doubt she did, but even if she did, she would have been under such severe control at this point that it wouldn't have mattered anyways. And the reason it wouldn't have mattered is because, remember, at this point, James had convinced Kelly to lie to her parents about his age and his identity, which meant that he would have felt a really strong sense of power and control over her. So things like his past didn't really matter. It didn't really matter what Kelly thought of it because he controlled how she thought. So in terms of James's past, he was born in 1948. The date is not to be found anywhere for some reason. Same kind of thing with that there's only one photo of him. He was an unemployed divorcee. He was described by people as being completely teetotal and a non-smoker. He was quite well groomed. He liked his house to be in very nice order, wanted things to be where they should be. Everything has its place. He was a very house-proud kind of guy. But he was also a Jekyll and Hyde character because behind closed doors over the years to various women, there was a history of severe abuse. So in 1980, he had been married for 10 years up until that point, and his wife actually filed for divorce in an attempt to get away from him because of his violence. It's also clear the reason why he let this divorce happen was because he had his sights on another girl, and although his ex-wife was an adult, it seemed like the people or the partners he was choosing were getting younger and younger. So instead of them being consensual relationships, they were actually grooming relationships. So in 1980, the same year as the divorce, he got with 20-year-old Tina Watson. Tina fell pregnant by him and he would regularly beat her even when pregnant. He would kick her in between the legs, and she actually described that he used her as a punching bag. There was also one occasion with Tina where she was in the bath, she was just relaxing, having a nice time. James burst in and tried to drown her in the bath. So that was actually the catalyst that made her think, I need to get out of here right now. So that's why she actually left. So they were together for roughly 2 years. And after she left, James began stalking her before he moved on to his next victim, which was Wendy Mottershead, who was 15 years old. So full-on grooming at this point, full-on paedophile, full-on dirty scumbag. It was clear that patterns were beginning to emerge, so he also tried to drown Wendy by putting her head underwater when she was at the kitchen sink. About the extreme levels of abuse and coercive control, she went on to say, "It frightened me. But you get to the point that you're too frightened to do or say anything. You just took it." Once the relationship with Wendy started to deteriorate, and as she became older in years, they were together for approximately 4 years, then James moved on to someone even younger, which was our 14-year-old Kelly. It's also important to note that James showed a history of stalking with all of his previous partners. And in terms of domestic abuse and coercive control, stalking increases the risk of partner homicide by 300%. I can't remember the year, but it's a study done by Stark. So fast forward to 1993, Kelly and James have been, I'm not saying the word dating, he has been raping her and grooming her for, the guts of 2 years. And at this point, remember, she's 16, her parents now know there's nothing really they can do about it, and she's starting to stay at his house more and more. And also around this time, she had finished high school, which is so incredibly sad that, it should be like a really exciting time in a young person's life, and new adventures, new doors are opened, and that's the door that she went into. It's just, oh, he's such a fucking creep. He's just such a sick, disgusting human. So Kelly started staying there from Friday to Sunday, and this was quite meticulous, quite like clockwork. His control over Kelly increased significantly. So the more time that she spent around him and the less time she spent around her parents, her friends, at school, his control increased. So her world got smaller and smaller. His control was so bad, for example, that when she went on Friday to Sunday to his house, when she would leave, he would walk her to the bus stop, and then she would get on the bus, she would come back home, she would get off the bus, she would walk back to her house, and as she was opening the door, her mum would say that, boom, he would phone to ask where Kelly was and had she got back. He had timed it that well that he knew how long it would take her to literally walk from the bus back to her house, and how long the bus would take, and it's insanity. And this is why the parents started to get even more concerned than they already were, because he seemed to care more about Kelly's whereabouts than her parents, and that seems really odd because it was done in a really controlling way. And again, remember, Kelly's only 16. Her brain is nowhere near fully developed yet. So she's probably mistaking this control for affection and love and care, that he cares about her. He loves her so much that he's willing to like check up on her all the time and make sure she is where she's meant to be to keep her safe. Mum also started to notice changes in Kelly. So she would usually wear really colourful clothes, really bright, like a teenager, and then the more and more she started to see James, her outfits changed to dark colours, to greys. Mum would also say that she would often spend lots of time when she was at home just on the couch with her like head down, just kind of staring off into space, and seemed really like glum. It was clear that her self-worth and her self-esteem was being slowly eroded over time. At this point, Kelly probably just felt numb, broken. Mum also said that she noticed that Kelly stopped grooming herself, so her hair would be greasy, and she stopped having showers regularly, and Mum thought this was really, really strange. It's also important to remember it was the 90s, and domestic abuse and coercive control that in nowhere near was how informed people are today, and like the knowledge that everyone knows about it. It was nothing like that. So although she knew something was wrong, she probably had no idea what the gravity of the situation actually was. James continued to RAP and groom Kelly, and as he continued to do this, his control tightened even more. It was around this point that her parents started to notice bruises and marks and some scars and things like that when she would come back home during the week. So after the weekend at James's, she would come back and they would see these things. And when they would ask, there was always an excuse. She would say things like she tripped over a wall, she walked into a door, she fell over, anything. And the stories kind of got a bit more outrageous as time went on, and Mum obviously knew they were fake, but Kelly isn't admitting anything. She's never said that he's treated her badly. She says she loves him, she says he's a nice guy. So they actually don't have any evidence unless she says it herself. We have no idea what was happening in James's house when the two of them were alone, but we can imagine that it was horrific and very, very abusive. Kelly's frame of mind at this point would have been that when he's beating her or hitting her, that she deserved that because of XYZ behaviours that he said she had done, that she had wronged him for some reason. So in her mind, she's thinking that she deserved these things, like these are consequences for the things that I've done wrong, and he's proving to me that he loves me by taking the time to try to correct my behaviours or give me consequences for behaviours that I've done that are wrong. So I think the dynamic in a coercively controlling relationship is so complex, and when people say things like, oh, why didn't she just leave, that actually drives me crazy. It's not that simple. Actually, most women are statistically 70% of women are murdered after they leave abusive partners because the partner loses control and it tips them over the edge. So eventually Mum had enough, and she didn't know what else to do. So she said to Kelly, it was a threat, she didn't actually mean it. She said, listen, Kelly, if you don't tell us what's happening with him, you can't come back to this house. So, she threatened to kick her out. She said she didn't want her going back there. Mum basically just wanted Kelly to communicate with her and Dad a lot more than what she had been, because she was super, super withdrawn, and she didn't want her to go there anymore. She didn't want her to go to this man's house anymore. So Mum thought that this might kind of shake her up a little bit and maybe give her a fright to think, okay, right, maybe I will break up with him. Her mum pleaded with her to break up with him, but of course this didn't work. So then soon after, one night, Mum comes home and she goes up to the bedroom, sees Kelly's light is on and goes in, and Kelly's packing a bag. And Kelly says, oh, I went to his house and you said I had to leave if I did that, so that's what I'm doing. And she's packing up her bag, and Mum is saying, no, like that's not what I meant. I would never do that. I just want you to stay. That's not what that was. And as Mum was pleading with her, because Kelly had her back to her while she was packing, she turned around and Mum seen that one entire side of Kelly's face was black. She had been beaten badly. Mum was completely shocked and distraught by this and asked her what had happened. And of course, Kelly gave a spiel about being jumped by a group of girls and a couple having rescued her and brought her home. But when Mum asked questions about the story, it didn't make sense and things didn't add up. Like, Mum was asking, well, why wouldn't they have brought you to the hospital? And Kelly had no answers for a lot of the questions. So Mum knew it didn't make sense. Her story was changing. It was obviously a lie. Again, she was covering up for James. So Kelly did go to move in with James, and Mum at this point was completely hopeless. So she contacted the domestic violence unit, and the only thing that they could tell her to do was to go to the doctors and make an appointment in Kelly's name and tell the doctor about the situation and what was happening. So then if Kelly ever went to the doctor, that the doctor would have kind of background knowledge or information as to what's going on if she came in with, injuries or bruises or whatnot. But of course, Kelly would never go to the doctors, because at this stage, James had full control over her life. There was no way she was going to the doctor for anything. So now we've got to the point where she's living with James, but he still lets her come home periodically to see her parents. And the reason he has to do this is because if he completely cut her off, knowing that they were a close family, that would arouse a lot of suspicion and a lot of attention. So he's kind of quite like cunning in that regard, that he knows I have to give them a little bit of her to kind of save myself, basically. So one day Kelly comes home and they're in the kitchen making some tea, and Mum notices a bite mark on Kelly's arm. And Mum says, oh my God, what the hell is that? She's like, that looks like a bite mark. And Kelly says, no, it's not. And she goes off into a big story, and oh, you'll never believe what happened. And Mum says, what? And she says, oh, I was running for the bus and I fell over and fell into a load of brambles. And of course, Mum's thinking, no, Kelly, that looks like a bite mark. And Mum would kind of say to her straight, she wouldn't like feed into the stories, but Kelly would be adamant, no. So again, this must have been so frustrating for Mum that she knows what's happening, but Kelly isn't admitting to anything. She's not saying anything. So Mum is helpless. It's obvious now that James's attacks on 16-year-old Kelly at the time was getting more brazen, more obvious. He was doing injuries that people could see. So he probably thought that he could get away with a lot of things and no one would really have any power to do anything. And remember, Kelly, the reason why she would keep lying at this point to cover up for him would be she would have been absolutely terrified to tell the truth, because if she did, can you imagine the thought of what she would have been thinking the beating would be that she would have gotten from him for telling people that? It would, like, for her, it made more sense to keep her safe, to lie about it, than to say the truth, as hard as that is for people to believe. But remember, she's a child. Her brain isn't fully developed. She's been undergoing severe abuse at the hands of a sadistic psychopath. Mum and Dad really feel at this point that James is kind of intentionally now keeping her from them, because her visits start to get more infrequent and her phone calls start to get a bit more infrequent too. But there was a small light at the end of the tunnel. Kelly actually left James in November 1995 because of the arguments they were having. But this was to be really short-lived, as James, typical of his history, began stalking Kelly severely. She felt at this point that she had no other option but to get back with him. He was following her when she tried to go to work. He was outside her house. He was calling her. He was doing everything. She probably felt like she couldn't get away from him, and maybe it was easier just to be with him. His stalking of her was utterly relentless. He essentially stalked her until he got her back into his grip. Now, this is really dangerous if you're dealing with somebody with a personality disorder, because if you leave and you separate, they lose control. So when she decided to leave him, he lost control for that time. That means when she gets back with him, he needs to regain that control, but regain even more control as well. So the abuse and the violence gets even more significant. An example of this increase of control was that now that Kelly got back with him and moved into the house with him, he no longer let her go to her parents' house to visit them. So they then started going to James's house to visit Kelly. And Kelly didn't obviously say this to her parents, that she wasn't allowed to go over there anymore. Instead, she tells mum that she's got a new job in a factory and that she quit her old job. So she's also working at the weekends, she's working overtime, and she's working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So she wouldn't really be around, so she wouldn't be able to call over to them anymore. That's the story mum and dad got. Although, you know, they were a little bit skeptical, but at the same time, mum and dad knew Kelly to be a really hard worker, so it didn't surprise them that she would want to work 7 days a week. So they thought that this was true, but sadly it was not. So now we've gotten to the point where Kelly is with James all of the time, so his control is completely encompassed her. So on one of the trips to see Kelly to James's house, Tommy and Margaret, mum and dad, they go there, they march over there because they haven't seen her in a while. They're wondering what's going on. She never calls over anymore. Even though the whole job thing, it's still a bit weird that she never finds any time to call over. They go over, they knock on the door, and James answers, and he seems really nice, and he's like, oh, come on in, like, let's have a cup of tea. And they're a little bit taken aback with how kind of relaxed he is, that maybe they start to doubt themselves a little bit. They go into the sitting room, they see Kelly, but Kelly's sitting there on the couch, again with her like head down, just kind of staring into the abyss, quite dark and gloomy, not really saying much, not really interacting. And mum notices that there's a hole in the floor, and she's thinking, what the heck is that? And she asks James, like, what is that? And James says, oh, that's just from a gas engineer. He was just coming to fix one of the gas pipes, so he's left that there. And mum didn't really think anything else of it, but that hole will feature later, so remember that for later. Her parents didn't realise at the time, but that would be the last time they see Kelly alive. From there on out, the only time they spoke with Kelly was on the phone, and even that was sporadic and became really infrequent. So in December 1995, during some of these phone calls when Kelly would actually call her parents, mum started to note that she seemed strange, just seemed odd, like she was different anyways. She was really withdrawn, but this was something else. Something seemed really off. So as the weeks turned into months, her parents grew more and more concerned and more worried. And so did other people who knew Kelly. At one point, one of her brothers went to James's house to see Kelly, but he said that she wasn't in. At another point, a neighbour on the street where they lived wanted to see Kelly because she was concerned about her, but James would only let the neighbour see Kelly from an upstairs window, which is so fucking weird. Like, hello, like red flag. That's so bizarre. And then on March 10th, 1996, mum had actually spoke to Kelly on the phone and was telling her off for missing a dental appointment. And mum didn't realise, but that would actually be the last time they spoke. And on the same conversation, Kelly had told mum that she would call over to the house for Mother's Day. So mum was really excited about this. She couldn't wait to see her. She was looking forward to it. But Mother's Day came and Kelly didn't show up. Instead, a card showed up, and it was a card that wasn't written in Kelly's handwriting, and mum thought that was really, really strange. She said it looked like it had been traced like numerous times. The letters were over and over, like tracing over the same letters again and again, and she thought that was really weird. And then she thought the following weekend it was Kelly's dad's, Tommy's birthday, and the day after that it was their wedding anniversary. So she thought maybe she would see her then, but the same thing happened. They got 2 cards in the post, and again, mum knew this isn't Kelly's handwriting. This is him. He's written this. And she actually said to Tommy, her husband, I bet he has her tied up somewhere. So at this point, as you can imagine, mum is absolutely frantic. She's phoning the police. She's asking them to go out and do call-outs. She's phoning the doctor. She needs to go to the house herself to see that Kelly is safe and well. So her and Tommy get ready. They're about to go out the door, literally opening the door to go out, when one of their sons come home and they say, oh, we're going to see Kelly. Like, we want to make sure that she's okay. And he says, oh, I was just talking to one of my friends. He said that he saw her and that she's fine. So mum and dad are like, oh, okay. So then they decide, okay, well, right, we won't go down there. We'll leave it then, because her dad says that if they go down there, he thinks that the mum will cause a scene with James and will, basically kick off. And the dad thought that if this happened, it would push Kelly away even more. So they decided, okay, we're just going to wait at home and we won't go. Upon hearing this news that a friend had seen them, they were so pleased that they thought, oh my gosh, thank God she's okay, thank God. But it actually completely slipped their mind to ask when this friend had seen Kelly. And it turns out, considering now it's March, the friend had actually seen her in December. And mum is completely haunted by the fact that she thinks if they had went around there that day, things may have turned out differently. So at this point, there's an entire month where no one's heard from Kelly. Nobody knows what's going on. They've got no phone calls. They've not seen her. They've not went there. Other people have said they've seen her. It's a bit of a mishmash. No one knows anything. So in terms of the actual case itself, no one also really knows anything about what happened in that last month, bar the injuries that she had. And sadly, on the 17th of April, 1996, Tommy and Margaret got a knock on their door from police telling them that their daughter was dead. As soon as Margaret saw the police, she turned to Tommy and said, he's killed her. Dad was in complete disbelief and couldn't believe that someone who claims to love another person could kill them. He literally could not compute that in his mind. And Mum continues to say to Dad, I told you he would do it, I knew he would. James had actually presented himself on the same day to the police station and claimed that his girlfriend had accidentally drowned in the bathtub during an argument. He tried to say that she inhaled water and that he tried to resuscitate her but was unsuccessful. He said that she pretended to be unconscious quite often, so he thought that that's what she was doing. Police, of course, upon hearing this, rushed to the house and found Kelly naked in the bedroom. She was completely emaciated. She had been 8.5 stone and now she was about 5 stone. Police found Kelly's blood in every single room of the house. The post-mortem examination revealed that Kelly had over 150 separate injuries to her body. During the last month of her life, when no one had heard from her, she had been tied to chairs and radiators by her hair and ligatures around her neck. She had not received water for several days before her death. The pathologist said in over 600 victims of homicide he's examined, this was the worst. He had never came across injuries as extensive. The autopsy revealed that Kelly was stabbed with meat forks, knives, and scissors. She had crush injuries to both her hands. She had both knees that were kicked in and absolutely shattered. She had scalding to her buttocks and her left leg. She had burns on her thigh from a hot iron, a fractured arm, stab wounds inside her mouth, mutilation of her ears, nose, lips, eyebrows, mouth and genitals, wounds caused by a spade and pruning shears, both eyes gouged out, stab wounds to the empty sockets of her eyes, and a partial scalping. The pathologist determined that Kelly's eyes had been removed not less than 5 days and not more than 3 weeks before her death, meaning that she had been alive with her eyes gouged out in the dark, alone, completely petrified, terrified, in excruciating, agonizing pain, not knowing what he was going to do next, what he was going to use next to inflict pain on her. And at this point, I can only imagine that Kelly had completely lost all sense of hope. Her exact cause of death was determined to be drowning because she was beaten around the head with a shower head very badly, and then she was drowned in the bath. I can't even imagine the absolute terror of not being able to see and just not knowing what this horrific I don't even want to call him a person because he doesn't even deserve that. It was also clear from Kelly's injuries that this wasn't just a sudden eruption or outburst of violence. This had been systematic, it had been slow, it had been deliberate, it had been done over time, gradually, and it had been done, these injuries had been done to cause her the utmost pain, distress, humiliation, suffering, and degradation imaginable. She was quite literally tortured to death. It's just incomprehensible and inexplicable, the sheer level of suffering that this poor child had to endure at the hands of this sick fuck. Her parents describe their bodies as shutting down when they heard what had happened to their daughter. They say that ever since that day, she is the first and last thing they think about. Mum tortures herself with the thought that Kelly may have thought they didn't love her because they didn't save her. Kelly was buried the day before her 18th birthday, and she was buried in a graveyard that overlooks the beautiful Peak District. Her funeral was attended by hundreds and hundreds of people. People quite literally took their hats off as the hearse drove by. There was no room in the church and people had to stand outside on the street and in the yard. If that wasn't enough, the parents then had to endure the trial. James denied murder and would go on to say that Kelly had wound him up so much. He said that she would put him through hell winding him up. He also tried to claim that Kelly would taunt him about his dead mother and that she had a bad habit of hurting herself to make it look worse. When asked to explain why he had battered, stabbed and blinded Kelly, he actually had the fucking cheek to say that Kelly had dared him to do it, challenging him to do her harm. What a load of absolute bollocks. She would have been utterly terrified of that man, and he's trying to claim that she was, it's so ridiculous. It then became clear that the hole in the ground that Kelly's parents had seen when they went to visit her in his house was one of the places that he kept her locked up. Luckily, 2 of his previous partners came forward and testified at the trial, which was brilliant because it showed the history of his abuse and his coercive control and his pattern of violence throughout all of his relationships. It took the jury only 1 hour to decide that this man, this scumbag, was guilty. He was served a minimum sentence of 20 years, with the judge saying, "This has been a terrible case, a catalogue of human depravity. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, so far as it is in my power, that you will abuse no more." He has been up for parole since the 20 years are up, but of course he's never been granted parole, and I really don't think that he ever will. And if he does, I imagine that he won't last too long. It was actually the first case in Manchester where all of the jury were offered professional counselling because of the trauma that they had to endure by seeing the evidence, the distress of seeing the photo evidence, and just in general, the sickening violence of the case was so extreme. It's nothing that anyone could have dared to imagine. Thank you for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one.